Well, on this week's Sarah's Country Opinion Maker, we are touching on the massive problem that is food waste across our entire supply chain. Our primary sector exports over 80% of food produced here in New Zealand, but not everything makes it to the consumer, with a huge gap in the first step of our supply chain in primary production. So what work can we do to add value to those side and waste streams within our food produce? Well, there's an incredible alliance called the Bioresource Processing Alliance, which is a portal to combine world-class science and engineering capabilities and technical facilities of 4 of New Zealand's national research providers: Ag Research, Callaghan Innovation, Plant and Food Research and Scion, along with all New Zealand universities. The Alliance aims to expand New Zealand's export market opportunities through the creation of high-value products from what is currently low-value biological resources. And the resources that the BPA utilise are secondary byproducts from the primary industries. It's a pleasure to welcome to Sarah's Country Anna Yallop, who oversees the Bioresources Processing Alliance. My apologies. Thank you, Anna. I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the show. It was set up in 2012 with government funding. Can you give us a bit of background on how the Alliance was formed and the drivers and key people behind it at the time?
Sure. So it was set up at a time when the government and some of those research organisations that you mentioned were really interested in collaborating more on research projects, because a lot of the times, traditionally, some of the research organisations were sort of always going for the same pot of money, if you like. So we were trying to pull something together that showed that the researchers in different organisations could work collaboratively together on projects and sort of pull together best teams for projects based on what companies needed. And it was also about stopping stuff from going to landfill or to really low value uses, and try and increase the export dollar and the value back to industry. So our goal at the time was to help generate another $100 million in export revenue for New Zealand back in 2012 when it was set up. And luckily in 2009 we were very lucky to get another $9 million in the budget to restart, because MB, who funds us, the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, really liked the model that we ran with. So we were lucky with that.
It's great, isn't it? It's about closing that loop and the circular economy and all of these key words, as well as reducing emissions. They weren't popular back in 2009, 2012 as they are now in 2021. So I can only see the work you're doing being accelerated and amplified by the demand.
Exactly. And that's why I was really pleased in particular that MB did fund us some more, because it was sort of a tipping point when we were getting to the end of our program. It was a 6-year program initially. And I sort of thought, it's just really when companies are really starting to get into this, and it's too hard to let New Zealand companies just do it alone. So I was really pleased to see that the government stumped up some cash to carry on to support New Zealand companies to reduce emissions, that we look at more. Initially it was all about, sort of stuff going to landfill. But as it turned out, we found out that a lot of stuff actually doesn't go to landfill. It does go somewhere. It's just about increasing the value and saving costs for companies as well. And as a result of that means less emissions and environmental benefits. That's great.
And this isn't just about pet food or the easy options. This is about high value, which needs some pretty high-tech research and scientific research at that. How do you go about pairing up our supply chain with our world-class researchers in those organisations?
So sometimes there are companies who are already working with researchers and organisations, so they already have a relationship with the researchers and scientists, so they can kind of continue. The scientists and business development people in the organisations can kind of preempt what support they might need in various projects. But sometimes they just hear about us, or we present at various public forums, etc., and companies are sort of interested to hear about how they can use their byproducts, but not have to do it all on their own. So they're always kind of needing some support from anything from equipment to money. You know, we fund the research to do it. We don't fund the companies, but the companies put in co-funding. But because it's byproducts, the biggest pressure, I think, is them having time to do these kind of projects. So that's the big key one for us. And also having the access to the equipment and the ideas, because a lot of companies will come to us and they have this raw material that they don't know what they can do with it. So we might start right at the beginning and say, you know, these are the kind of things you can do based on what it's made up of, and give them a range of options, because companies aren't always wanting to go into a really high value nutraceutical, but they might just want to do a pouched product when they've been making like a raw, like a fruit, you know, just selling fruit as it is. They might want to just go one step further into something that's quite advanced for them potentially, but it's on the road to going to higher value opportunities for them.
It is crazy, and it just showcases that New Zealand is still so much in an ingredient and commodity headspace where we want to spend all of our energy on selling the raw apple and don't have the energy or appetite to invest in what could potentially be more value back to the grower.
Well, it's not always the case. Like, there are plenty of instances when the product in its raw form is perfectly good and it sells for a premium, you know, because of what it is. Increasingly, things like fish is actually getting sold whole rather than filleted, which sometimes has more value than actually filleting. So it's kind of it's not always the case that that we're doing lower value things. But I think part of the challenge is that people are realising that the costs of getting rid of some of the byproducts has forced them to kind of look at, well, what else could we be doing with them? The product might not be good enough to export because it might look a bit funny or have, you know, holes in it or stuff like that. So there is that push to try and save costs for companies, which I'm definitely a supporter of. And if that gets them on the path to higher value products as well as their core products, then that's a good outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I know at the time when she was minister in the space, Eugenie Sage, she was wanting to bring in, you know, a rubbish tax and getting rid of waste. And so therefore turning that into an initiative is fantastic. The other thing too is what work is the Alliance doing in pairing up incredible sort of entrepreneurs and that want to go, and startups that want to go down that track, and you know, because they're the ones with the hunger to see this through.
Yeah, there's we do support some of those smaller companies for sure, and it's usually the things that they don't have the equipment in-house to start something, but they've got the idea. So we might get them started on some of those sorts of initiatives by doing a proof of concept for them, so they can then take that idea to investors potentially or to customers, and that allows them to grow. And it sort of enables them to demonstrate something before they've had to invest too much in it, because we don't want companies to put in plants before they can afford them and before it's proven. You know, you want to be able to prove something at a lab scale, pilot scale, pre-commercial scale, and then commercial scale before you invest in that expensive equipment if you have to.
Let's talk about some of the fun initiatives and products that have come out of it, adding value along the waste streams. Can you share some of your favourites?
Oh, some of my favourites. Well, everybody's always interested in the black soldier fly ones. That's something that's kind of, it's quite large overseas in insect proteins. It's only just sort of emerging in New Zealand. It's been around for 5 or 6, 7 years or so. But that's around getting black soldier flies to eat organic matter. It could be a range of things, including wasted food that's otherwise not edible by humans, and then converting that into larvae, which is then milled and made into protein for pet food, animal feed, and potentially humans as well.
Oh, wow. It's incredible. So we're basically using our food waste to feed larvae to turn into alternative protein products.
Yes, yeah, because it's a great converter into protein, and protein is something obviously everybody's really interested in. It has a better footprint than some of the other proteins, which has appeal for some people as well. So that's and it's a great way of getting rid of a lot of mass of produce that might not be good for even going to landfill. Everybody wants to avoid avoid stuff going to landfill. I guess the really important thing to know is that we're trying to change the attitude of people to stop sort of thinking about it as waste, because it is, in most times, it's perfectly good food that's edible. It just might look ugly. So we're trying to get across, especially when you're trying to create new food-based products for people, if we can refer to them in ways that don't put people off, that's great, because it's I always say, we're not talking about the stuff that's swept off the floor of the factory. We're talking about perfectly nutritious, edible food that sometimes just isn't good enough to sell at a premium in terms of a natural product in its normal form.
We're going to be catching up soon with Miranda Morosa, who put together the Morosa report to the Parliamentary Environmental Committee. What appetite are you seeing? Are you seeing the support of this government, and what more could they be doing to support you, say, into the next 5 years to achieve some of these lofty goals of reducing food waste?
Yeah, I think definitely continuing to support the companies, because they're doing their best to do something that isn't necessarily within their natural sort of sense of what they do. So it's stepping out of their comfort zone for a lot of companies. They're trying to do good things that are good for the environment. They're trying to save costs, which is always as a bonus. So anything we can do to support the companies there is really useful. It's not necessarily something government can necessarily help with, but the capex, the equipment needed to put in these plants, etc., can be really expensive, and that's always where there's a massive gap in New Zealand. MB can't fund capex, and a lot of the other research and development funds cannot fund capex. It's not within their mandate, but that's certainly a gap that we're seeing in New Zealand. It's something that we struggle with, for sure.
Then the work that the Food Innovation Network and I know here at Food South and Lincoln are doing to help collaboration happen across multiple different byproducts and sectors to utilise manufacturing collectively from toll processing. Are you seeing some good examples of that happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we first started, MB wanted us to create a database of where all the byproducts are in New Zealand and the volumes and where they come from. And we looked into that further, and we realised it was just too sensitive at that time for companies to talk about. They didn't want people to know that they had excess food. They didn't want people to know what they did with them sometimes. It was very sensitive. So we held off on that. But in the last 2 or 3 years, we're seeing a change where some of the companies are very prepared to talk amongst themselves and with their competitors, even to say, look, we've got this problem with this excess food. It's not a good look when people can't get access to food. We need to start doing something about it. So I think there's a real change now. So we are actually looking at creating more of a database and what we can do with that as well.
That's encouraging. So we want to, in the primary industry here in New Zealand, wear it as a badge of honour that we have a low value food waste product that could be a massive opportunity to service the nutritional needs of our most vulnerable. What a great way to actually take pride in that. But I can actually appreciate and understand why they would be sensitive about it. It's incredible. All it takes is a movement, and well done, Anna, in the Alliance, to be able to stick with it when you knew the tipping point was coming. Thank you very, very much for your time, Anna Yallop, there from the Bioresource Processing Alliance. And please reach out to them if you've heard anything that's inspired you along the way where your organisation could help contribute, because we have some lofty goals to reduce our food loss. And 20 to 36% of food loss is in that first stage of the supply chain and can be redirected into some side streams, which could be some very New Zealand's most, next inspirational products.
One of the first things you learn when you live out here
is where to shop for the things you need to live out here.
like electric fencing,
or horse feed,
or bee suits,
children's
chook food.
Do you want a couple of these?
or something stylish to wear. Not everyone's got stuff like this.
But at Farmlands we do, and then some.
So if you need anything to help your farm,
grow, milk, drench,
rear, come on in.
Because we're out here too.